Welcome to a new time. Welcome to a new era.
This ain't WCW. This ain't Monday Night Raw. This ain't SmackDown. This ain't even WWE.
Feel the wrath of the pythons. You shall feel the wrath of Hulkamania. This is where the power lies.
And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so.
He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family.
I got a 66 and 2/3 chance of winning because Kurt Angle knows he can't beat me and he's not even going to try.
It's time to step into the squared circle and get it done.
Welcome back, everyone, to Legends and Champions this week. Andy Evans here, coming to you now from home. I'm finally back home in Weymouth, and firstly, let me just send my apologies for no show last week. The last couple of weeks have been an absolute mental nut job of a life. I was away all of last week with work. I've been away most of this week in a conference, which means that I just really couldn't get any Legends content out there. What was annoying was the show was taped. I just couldn't get the internet to send it over. So this week is what we're calling the Lost Show. And that means I'm going to give you the segments that were recorded last week, this week. Yeah. Which means we're going to be looking back at Beyond the Mat, the documentary from the Barry Blaustein that was released back in 1999. We're also going to be looking back to Bad Blood in Your House that took place between The Undertaker and the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, the debut of that big red machine, Kane. There was one other segment recorded, but I'm not going to give you that. And that was my take on the Mr. McMahon documentary, simply because, ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2 weeks now since that was released. Every man and dog on a podcast has talked about it, so you don't really want to hear the views of a crazy Englishman regarding a crazy former owner of a business. So I'm not going to give you that, but I am going to give you everything else that was part of that show. Next week, things will be back to normal. We'll be doing a new topic right here on Legends. But this week, please accept my apologies for a bit of a weird show, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, there is one thing I would like to address, first and foremost, and that is Mitch and Dimitri from ACT. And you see, guys, what I want to address is this. What do you mean the Blackpool Combat Club's a stupid name? Blackpool's a great town. We have a big Eiffel Tower. It's called the Blackpool Tower, and it's basically the Eiffel Tower, but we have that over here. We have the Blackpool Pleasure Beach. We have an amazing lights display in the winter. But I do get what you're saying. And also, may I just say, William Regal was from Blackpool, and he trained them all. Hence, the Blackpool Combat Club. So you can't say the Blackpool Combat Club is a bad name. No, you can't do that. Oh, ACT, you got my blood riled when you said that on the weekend. All seriously, though, it does need a new name, just like most things in professional wrestling. But this weekend, don't know where I was going with any of that. This weekend on the Maguire on Wrestling Network is going to be a big one because ACT will be here. Mitch and Dimitri with the Greek World, what the heck am I saying? The Greek World Order, the GWO on Saturday. Mike will be here with the Wrestle Dream Fallout on Sunday from All Elite Wrestling. It is a big weekend each and every week here at Maguire on Wrestling. So I'm going to stop rambling on. I'm going to take you to break. When I come back, I'm going to actually take you back in time to last week, and we're going to talk about Beyond the Mat. I'll see you in a week's time. Take care, everybody.
If you like Maguire on Wrestling, you need to subscribe to the free Maguire on Wrestling podcast feed. Not only do you get access to the show a day early, but you also get free bonus content every week. Share a laugh with Mitch and Dimitri on the alternate commentary table.
Oh, I'm Cody Rhodes. Look at me.
Now, if this was Damian Priest, he'd apologize.
He probably would have apologized.
Follow along with the film career of one of wrestling's biggest stars with We've Seen a Movie.
Basically, I'm just watching John Cena play his wrestling character.
If John Cena was a raging alcoholic,
Atlantic City mooch before this.
Get all these shows, exclusive interviews, and more for free by subscribing to McGuire on Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, we're keeping with the documentary feel here at LAC this week, looking at one of the most groundbreaking documentaries of its time that really did peel back the curtain on the world of professional wrestling. That's right, Beyond the Mat, 1999 documentary that was produced, written, directed, and narrated by Barry Blaustein. So what is it that really does make this film stand out? It's not just about the glitz and the glamour inside the ring. Blaustein takes us beyond that drama to explore the real lives of the wrestlers, the physical toll, the emotional struggles, the raw humanity of these larger-than-life characters. In particular, this film focuses on Mick Foley, the Funker, Terry Funk, and Jake the Snake Roberts, each of which were at different stages of their career. And what's really fascinating now is when you look at Jake Roberts back then in 1999 and Jake Roberts now, thanks to the Accountability Crib and DDP Yoga. You really see this triangle. You know, one who is at the top of his game in respect of Mick Foley, one who was struggling to leave the limelight, and one who was battling personal demons. And the journey for this film really started from Blaustein's love of professional wrestling. It took over 3 years to create, produce, and compile. And during that time, he traveled across the US, interviewing and speaking to fans, attending indie shows, and speaking to performers. And his mission really was to seek to understand why anyone would choose to do this. Why would they choose to lace up a pair of boots, get in the ring, and compete? And because of these interviews, because of this process, he got a front row seat to the reality of the squared circle, of the grueling realities behind the ring. So let's have a look at some of these highlights. First up, Mick Foley. We all know him as Mankind. We all know him as Dude Love. And we all know him as Cactus Jack. And Foley's a fan favorite in the WWF, known for putting his body on the line, really in some of the most brutal matches you could ever possibly imagine. But the beauty of Beyond the Mat was that it really did show another side of him. It showed the side away from the ring, off the mat. We see him at home with his wife, with his kids. We see that juxtaposition is powerful. And one of the most intense moments of the film comes when Foley's family watches in horror as he takes multiple chair shots during the I Quit match at the 1999 Royal Rumble against The Rock. Now remember, this was before concussion protocols were in place. So he was getting unprotected chair shots to the head. And it's really this painful reminder, the risks that these performers take don't just affect them, but it also affects their loved ones in the ring. Because we saw in horror Dewey's face. We saw his daughter. We saw his wife covering their eyes. We saw this bloody mess of Mick Foley. In arguably the match that made him, but, you know, it was relentless. The Rock layering and leveling with that steel chair to the cranium of Mick Foley. And then we've got Terry Funk, the hardcore legend, who at 53 years old was still competing in the ring, despite the numerous and countless injuries that had been taken on his body. And you bear in mind that Funk had been in the WWF as Chainsaw Charlie. He'd been at ECW. He'd main evented at hardcore matches. But this film captures Funk battling through injuries, needing knee surgery, but continuing to perform because as he admits, he can't let go of the ring. He's one of these individuals who can't separate character from person, ring from real life. But what's fascinating about it, it's both heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time to watch a man who gave his entire life to the sport to wrestle, literally and figuratively, with the concept of retirement. Didn't want to do it. And then there's the Snake, Jake Roberts, a wrestler whose career hit its peak in the 1980s. The man who many said should have been a booker, is a creative genius, has got a mind for storytelling, who can craft a promo. And we saw those promos at WrestleMania 6, at WrestleMania 7. A man who could get the crowd on his side even if he was a heel. But what the film does is it reveals a much darker chapter in his life. We see him struggling with addiction. We see him trying to reconnect with his estranged daughter. We see him talking about the relationship that he didn't have with his father. It's raw, it's heartbreaking, and it really does paint a stark picture of the aftermath that fame and the professional demons can create. And we see it all the time with performers who don't want to step out of the limelight. Guys like the Nature Boy Ric Flair. You know, Flair retired numerous times. Flair shouldn't be in the ring. But a few years ago when he did the retirement match, Ric Flair's last match, we all saw he couldn't go. But he can't step away from the limelight. He can't let go of the Nature Boy character. He has to be the Nature Boy Ric Flair. But what was also good about this film was it wasn't just the big names that it focused on. Because, as we said earlier on, when he goes around the ring, he goes around the US going to independence, it gives us a glimpse into the lives of those who are aspiring to make it to the World Wrestling Federation or to WCW. It's those inspirational stories of those people trying to break into the business. We meet Tony Jones and Mike Modest, both of whom got a tryout with the World Wrestling Federation. We saw a bit beyond the curtain there because we saw what it was like to do a tryout with Roland Alexander from APW. We saw what Jim Ross and Jim Cornette were looking for. And then we go even further into creative because we meet the late Darren Drozdov, the former NFL player whose journey took a tragic turn when a bot's pile driver left him paralyzed. But we see that creative journey with Vince. We see Vince's mind working because he says, you can puke on command, right? And Droz does. He pukes on command, and that's how we get puke. At the time, let's forget Dave just for a minute. Let's forget Uncle Dave just for a second. This film gave us a glimpse of what it's like in the business. Us outsiders, us who, some of us are desperately wanted to get involved. It tells us and it shows us what our heroes went through. But the production for Beyond the Mat didn't have its own problems. Blaustein was a wrestling fan himself, and as we said, he managed to get unprecedented access behind the scenes, especially with the World Wrestling Federation. But tensions grew. At the beginning, Vince was fully on board with the project. But as this film progressed, as this relationship began to develop, it also soured, to the point that McMahon tried to stop the movie's release. In fact, the World Wrestling Federation went as far as to pull all advertising for the film from its broadcasts, which then led to a legal battle with the film's distributor, which was Lionsgate. And funnily enough, a few years later, WWE films, majority of them would be done with Lionsgate. I just realized that. What? That's a bit of trivia. Ultimately, the tagline of the film became the movie that Vince McMahon didn't want you to see, and that alone had people flock to the theaters. Beyond the Mat was released in March of 2000, earned critical acclaim, and it deserved it. It got an 82% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and was praised for its ability to show a human side of professional wrestling. Some critics noted how the film makes the often glorified violence of wrestling feel even more unsettling when you see the real life consequences. We all know that Mick Foley eventually retired in 2000, but not before solidifying himself as a fan favorite, being inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2013. Terry Funk, his retirement was short-lived, and he participated in many more retirement matches well into his 70s, and unfortunately passed away last year. And Jake, we all know, as we mentioned earlier on, how he turned his life around thanks to DDP and the accountability crib. So there you have it. Beyond the Mat really does give us this unflinching look at the lives of those who choose to step into the ring. It's a film that's about as much more than wrestling. It's about passion. It's about sacrifice and the sometimes brutal reality of following your dreams. If you haven't seen it yet, I really recommend you check it out, even if you're not a wrestling fan. And that kind of goes back to the McMahon bit at the beginning, right? Let a non-wrestling fan watch it. You're obviously a wrestling fan to be listening to these shows. Get a non-wrestling fan. Sit down with them. Let them watch this film. Don't say anything. And see what their reaction is. So my wife hates professional wrestling, right? Absolutely detests it. In fact, she detested it so much, I dragged her to a TNA tour here in London, and she fell asleep. I took her to in fairness, it was a weekend of activity. So on the Saturday, we went to a meet and greet with the Hitman Bret Hart. Amazing, by the way. And on the Sunday, we went to Wembley Arena to watch TNA Maximum Impact Tour. And we had press tickets, and we were sat in the press booth. And, I'm sat here, I'm sat there with my wife sat next to me. And behind me, I've got journalists from the Sun newspaper and the Daily Star, and Alex Shane, who is a long-time British wrestler and promoter. And I could hear this noise. And this noise was like a grunting type thing. And I turned my head, and my wife is sat there asleep, snoring. Right? I hate professional wrestling, she says. But even she watched this out of the corner of her eye and went, that's brutal. That's hard. Why do they do this? And I think what this film does is it shows you that they do it because they've got a passion. They've got a passion to entertain. We've got a passion to entertain. Mike, Mitch, Dimitri, Joe, myself. Because we wouldn't be doing this otherwise. Check out Beyond the Mat. It's a classic, but it's up there as one of the best wrestling documentaries of all time. All right, we're going to go to break. Coming up next, let's go back in time to Bad Blood. We'll see you after this.
You got to stream the alternate commentary table. Every single Saturday, it's brought to you on the McGuire on Wrestling feed. I'm one half of your host, Dimitri Karolis, and I'm here with my partner, Mitch Hondras. Mitch, what is the alternate commentary table?
It's simple. It's the perspective of wrestling from the other side of the railing, the real fans.
That's right, the perspective that you need. You might have a little bit of fun, too. The alternate commentary table. Subscribe free now to the McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed wherever you get your podcast.
Shusha!
All right, welcome back to the Legends and Champions podcast. Let's do it, shall we? Let's go back in time. Let's open up our DeLorean. Let's go in Let's go 88 miles to the hour, back to the future, to October the 5th, 1997, to the Kiel Center in St. Louis, Missouri, for the 18th In Your House. But it wasn't just any show. This one had bad blood written all over it, both literally and figuratively. You see, at this point in the WWF, the company was navigating a transition, and tensions were higher than ever. The main rivalry heading into Bad Blood was between two of the biggest stars in the business. The Deadman, the Phenom, the Undertaker, and the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. This feud was personal. It dated back to SummerSlam, when Michaels cost the Undertaker the championship in the match against Bret Hart. A couple of months later, after a double DQ at Ground Zero, the WWE decided to settle the score with something that we had never seen before. Hell in a Cell. And Hell in a Cell effectively was a steel cage. But it was much more than that. It was a massive structure. It was 16 feet tall with a roof. It was an environment where no one could escape, no one could get in. And for The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, it was the perfect battleground to settle their score. So let's look at that. Let's look at that main event. Shawn Michaels facing off against The Undertaker. The match itself was groundbreaking. It went for 30 minutes. Brutal spectacle that left fans in awe. Right from the start, Michaels and his DX crew were outnumbered. But once that cell door was locked, it was just him and the Phenom. The match saw Michaels take some of the most vicious bumps we'd ever witnessed at that time, from being catapulted into the cell walls to being thrown off the top of the structure and crashing through the Spanish announce table. It always was the Spanish announce table, wasn't it? Always was. Funny that. It was never the Brits. It was never the Americans, sorry. Or the Germans. Or the French Canadians. It was always the Spanish table. Why was that? Does anybody know? If anybody knows why that was the case, please let me know, because I've always wondered, why the Spanish announce table? Anyway, just when it seemed like The Undertaker was about to finish Michaels and get the win, the lights went out and we had the big surprise. The debut of The Undertaker's brother in storyline, Kane, the Big Red Machine. It was one of the most shocking moments of the night. Kane ripped the cell doors off its hinges, assaulted The Undertaker with an absolutely devastating tombstone piledriver, and allowed Michaels to crawl over for the pin. But this wasn't just any interference. This was a moment that set the scene for one of the greatest, let's do your inverted commas now, inverted commas, sibling rivalries in wrestling history. The Undertaker versus Kane. Now that cell match was historic because Dave Meltzer gave it 5 stars, which is incredibly rare for WWF matches. And this Hell in a Cell would inspire many more. They're becoming a staple of programming and pay-per-views right the way through to this day. But the significance of Bad Blood doesn't end there. The event also marked the last time that Vince McMahon was featured as the chief announcer for a pay-per-view. After this, he then transitioned into his infamous Mr. McMahon and began his in-ring career. The persona would become central to storylines that fueled the Attitude Era. That era that was defined by rebellious characters like Austin, who would go on to feud with McMahon and define a generation of wrestling. But it is important to note that Bad Blood had its share of memorable matches, but it was also marred by tragedy. Because it was on that day that the loose cannon Brian Pillman was found dead in his hotel room. And this news, this heartbreaking news, really did cast a shadow over the show, and his scheduled match with Dude Love, Mick Foley, was cancelled. The wrestling world was totally left in shock when they announced it during the event. And I remember, I was at college at the time that Bad Blood was on. And, I remember back in May at Over the Edge when we had Owen's unfortunate passing. And I remember going into the LRC, the learning center, the library, if you will, logging onto the computers before we had one at home, having the dial-up, going onto the broadsheets and looking at the results of the pay-per-view the night before. I had that chance to watch it. It'd been recorded on VHS. Can you remember? VHSs, love them. And I remember being in shock at the death of Owen, but I also remember being in absolute shock over the death of Brian Pillman, because it was only the week before we'd seen him on TV. And I think it kind of makes it a bit more, prevalent because I'm watching a lot of ECW at the moment. Not ECW, WCW. And seeing Brian in his prime in that company as a member of the Four Horsemen, beginning this loose cannon character, he was one that I felt never really got the break that he deserved. He never really had a chance to shine or grow. And I'm not saying he was world champion material, absolutely not. But there is an argument to say that he could have been up in the main event. He could have had a killer match with the likes of The Undertaker. And I think if you talk about Brian Pillman, you just talk about the gunshot with Austin in that feud. But as always with the World Wrestling Federation, the show must go on. And despite the tragedy, Bad Blood continued with matches like the Nation of Domination versus the Legion of Doom and Owen versus Farouk for the Intercontinental Championship, which had been vacated due to the injury sustained by Steve Austin at SummerSlam. And there was even a tag match between the Hitman and the British Bulldog against Vader and the Patriot in what was an absolutely mental flag match. But when we look back on the card, it clearly belonged to that main event and to its debut of Kane. The match, the Hell in a Cell match, still to this day, almost 30 years, is still regarded as one of the greatest in wrestling history. The influence on this match and on professional wrestling is undeniable, with stars like Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins paying homage to it in their own Hell in a Cell classics. But we also shouldn't forget that this was the final pay-per-view before the infamous Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series. Another moment that would shape the future of professional wrestling. Since 1995, we had heard about this new generation. Bad Blood put the nail in that. It wasn't just the end of the new generation. It was the bridge to the Attitude Era. It was the bridge to this era that really turned wrestling on its head and made the WWF, once again, the number one promotion. So Bad Blood was pivotal in wrestling history, not just because of that brutal Hell in a Cell, but for the stories, for the characters, and for the shocking debuts that really shaped the future of the company. If you haven't seen it yet, do it. It's a masterclass in storytelling. It's a masterclass in brutality, and it's a masterclass in character development. And this was just the beginning of Kane's destruction. It was the beginning of the evolution of The Undertaker. And it was the beginning of the rise of Mr. McMahon.
This has been Legends and Champions with Andy Evans. Thank you for listening.